Welcome back, guys. Today's episode, I am sharing 9 true macabre horror stories. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. It's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. Now, let's begin. I don't tell this to new trainees. They already carry too many voices. Nights at the center have their own weather anyway. Fluorescence that buzz like the ceiling is holding its breath, recycled air that tastes faintly of coffee and dust, and the soft mechanical hush of the HVAC that, if you listen long enough, starts to sound like a person choosing not to speak. There's always a clock in the corner of your eye and a timer on your screen measuring silence, as if stillness itself needs to be quantified so it doesn't swallow you. My console sits under a laminated chart of questions, what we call our script. Though the word makes it sound like a play with cues and curtains. It's not a play, it's muscle memory that only matters when someone is bleeding, when fire is a problem, when a threat wears someone's voice like a mask. I keep the headset on even when I step away for a stretch. It's a habit, like bracing. Once during training, a supervisor told me that dispatchers are different because we live at the threshold. Everyone else gets to be in a place. We have to be in between. I laughed then. I don't now. A typical graveyard shift is a lot of ordinary. Noise complaints, diabetic lows, bar fights that have already burned out by the time we speak. Then, long intervals of nothing. We call it dead air, which seems dramatic unless you've watched it spool out at 2 a.m. Seconds stretching thin enough to see through. I keep a cup of weak coffee near the CAD keyboard and I work my crosswords in the margins of the incident. Printouts. The other dispatchers have their rituals too. Renata across from me chews peppermint gum like it owes her money. Devin taps his ring against his mug until someone throws a stress ball at him. The night supervisor, Gail, watches from the fishbowl office with the wall of monitors perched in the glow like a cat in a window. The board that shows our lines is a row of little lives. Emergency, wireless A, wireless B, VoIP, TTY, LARTTD, admin. There's one button with a strip of yellowed tape over it. Legacy. Someone wrote do not use in a red marker that bled through years ago. I've never seen it light. A retired dispatcher once told me that line used to connect to the old civil defense system, back when sirens were tested at noon on Wednesdays and everyone pretended they had a plan for the end of the world. She said they pulled the D-mark when they moved our center from the downtown basement to the new building off the highway after the ice storm. That was before my time. There are moments when the room takes breath with me. If you've worked nights long enough, you know the minute when the bar calls fade and the morning disasters haven't begun. A thin seam where the world feels paused. For us, in our county, that seam hovers around 2:15. The schedule renews itself. The CAD archive rolls over. The day pages become night pages, become day again. I used to like that minute. It felt like standing in the doorway between rooms, just for a second, choosing. The night this began, I was alone at my console. Renata was on her break, scrolling her phone in the kitchenette. Devin had taken the floor radio into the break room to heat noodles. Gail was reviewing policy revisions, highlighting in orange the parts she knew we'd ignore because they didn't match reality. The clock on my screen ticked to 2:16, and I leaned back, letting the chair complain. Somewhere on the highway, a TR. Uck threw a bass note of brakes into the dark. I thought about nothing at all. Then a ring popped, soft as a bubble, not the emergency trill. A single chime like the way an internal call announces itself, like someone pressing a doorbell with a finger they aren't sure about. I looked at the board. For a second I didn't understand what I was seeing. The legacy key shone a thin green instead of dead plastic gray, the tape over it throwing a crescent of shadow onto the panel. My finger hovered without touching. The clock rolled to 2:17. I pressed in. The automatic words found their track even as my mouth went dry. 911, what's the address of your emergency? On my screen, where the ALI should populate, it said simply, no ANI, no ALI. Usually that means a transient wireless call or someone disabled their ID. You can rebid the location, request another data pull. The rebid button pulsed, patient. I tapped it. The field stayed blank. The line timer marked 3 seconds, then 4, then 5. The sound, when it came, wasn't a voice first. It was a breath. Not the thin hiss of an empty line, but wet human breathing caught close to the mic as if someone was hiding the phone under their chin. I could almost feel it, warm against the foam of my headset. I repeated, trying to keep my tone level. Tell me exactly what's happening. The training cards tell you to guide someone toward clarity, but what they don't say is that you're trying to persuade them that reality has rules, and one of them is that you can be found. At 8 seconds, there was a small sound that made no sense until it did, the tiny clack of a plastic button on a toy recorder. A memory is a room you fall back into. The breathing hitched, and a small voice, thin, bright with effort, said my name. Not the way you say a stranger's name to get their attention. The way a kid tries it on, rolling it around to see where it sticks. A syllable snagged the way it used to when I was missing my front teeth. I recognized the exact error. I recognized the tiny pride in making it right the second time. I have never used my actual name on calls, only my call sign. I'm not going to write it here either. But I will say that there are only a few people who said it the way it landed on that line, and I used to be one of them. I swallowed and heard the click of my own throat. On the status board, the legacy key kept its faint, stubborn glow like a nightlight in a hallway. The rebid field pulsed again. White to gray, white to gray. I hit it because it was something to do. Can you tell me where you are? My voice sounded wrong to me, like it was coming from the speakers instead of my mouth. The small voice said my name again, both syllables careful. Then a whisper I couldn't make out, like someone making up their mind to jump. It wasn't an echo. Echoes come back thinner. This came back familiar. On a distant frequency, one of our patrol units did a routine status check. His voice filtered through the radio console, but I didn't hear it as a separate thing for a moment. Everything layered. I tried for the script, for stable ground. Are you safe? Do you need police, fire, or medical? The child's breathing picked up into a soft whimper. No crying, not yet. Just the pre-crying stair-step that means someone is holding themselves together by feeling each breath arrive. Somewhere in the background of the line, I picked up a sound that embarrassed me to recognize. The tiny fan on the bargain tape recorder I got for my 7th birthday. The one I used under my blanket to interview myself because I thought all important things happened in secret. Gail's reflection in the fishbowl window was a moving smear. I caught her eye and she stood, slow, careful, like I was balancing something that would spill if I moved too fast. I hit the supervisor alert with my left hand. I need a trap, I said, keeping my tone flat like we're supposed to, as if this was any other 911 with an unknown location. She nodded like she understood what I meant, even though what I meant was impossible. On the recording, if you listen very close, closer than I did that first night, you can hear the child's voice try my name a third time and fail at the middle. Then there's a little sigh of relief. Relief at hearing me, relief at saying it right. The timer hit 28 seconds. I said, I'm here, without meaning to. The child made a tiny sound back, and then the line dropped. Not the panicked clatter of a phone hitting the floor, not a disconnect tone, just a nothingness that arrived so completely it felt behaved, like a breath held to some count. The legacy key went dead. The clock on my screen slid to 2:18. For a half second, I thought the whole room had exhaled in one piece. The CAD log created the call record with a system incident number that didn't follow the usual pattern, like someone had added it by hand. 0000. Gail was already beside me, her hand on the back of my chair in the way she does when she wants to ground the room without being a person. What have you got? She asked. I told her. Nothing but a breath and a name. My name. The line? She asked. Legacy lit, I said, and hated how the words felt small. No ANI, no ALI, no callback. She looked at the board, at the strip of tape. I've never seen her look like she believed in ghosts. She didn't then either, but she didn't not. We reviewed the audio. Devin and Renata came back from break, their faces scrubbed of their usual night shift half-smiles. Devin asked if it was a prank. Renata said kids call from disconnected lines sometimes. They do, and they don't sound like you at 7 years old, trying your own name on to see if it fits. Gail called the county telecom on the after-hours line, and while she waited for someone to answer, the clock edged toward 2:30 and the room remembered itself, the radios clicking alive, a patrol unit calling out a traffic stop, the ordinary resuming like we hadn't just been listening to a version of me I had forgotten I remembered. Telecom called back with a tired voice and a keyboard clatter you could hear even through the processed phone line. The guy introduced himself as Rick and pulled up our trunks. Legacy shows decommissioned with the move, he said. No signaling. That's 1999 paperwork. If it lit, you're seeing a UI bug. He didn't say we were hearing things. He didn't have to. Gail asked him to check the call path anyway, and he said the thing they say when our script meets his. Not possible doesn't mean didn't happen, it just means I can't give you a screenshot for it. He opened a ticket that will live in the system forever with the subject ODD event at PSAP. I checked it a week later, and it had 3 updates. No reproduction, no faults found, please advise. I went home at 7 with the recorded call on a thumb drive I wasn't supposed to have. It wasn't a violation that would get me fired. It was a superstition kind of violation, the kind that makes you feel like you're carrying a lit match in your pocket. I told myself I'd listen with fresh ears after sleep. I'd hear what I missed in the adrenaline of it. But sleep is a door with a lock that sticks, and sometimes you're on the wrong side with your hands full. When I finally knocked myself into a nap, I woke up at 2:16 p.m. and laughed without humor because it wasn't funny at all. In the quiet of my apartment, I played the call. It was worse at home because there weren't any other sounds to dilute it. The breath was so close it felt like I should smell it. The tiny fan whir was there, and the plastic button click, and my name in that careful, proud, wrong right way. I remembered recording my name into a tape recorder to practice for the first day of second grade, when we were supposed to introduce ourselves with clear speaking. I remembered the way the TAs P made my voice sound higher and thinner, like the machine believed in a version of me I didn't. I do not remember dialing 911. My mother would have told me if I had. She told me everything back then. Because I was a nervous kid and information was a flashlight, we thought we could aim at the dark. The second night, I volunteered to take the same console. Renata gave me a sideways look but didn't ask. Gail said, "You don't have to be a hero," in that dry way she says kindness when she doesn't want to embarrass you with it. At 2:10, I stood up and stretched, then sat and adjusted the headset. At 2:16, I sipped coffee I didn't want, like I could anchor myself with something bitter. I watched the board without pretending not to. When the legacy key lit, it did it in a slow pulse, like the light had to find itself. I pressed in. 911. What's the address of your emergency? The same blank where the address lives, the same breath, but this time the voice didn't say my name first. It said very softly, "Is this home?" The S is a hiss with too much air because that's how I used to make S when my mouth was still figuring out its own machinery. The question hung there with a weight I couldn't afford. I didn't answer the question. "Where are you?" I asked instead, careful. "What do you see?" There was a rustle, fabric against plastic, like a phone slid along carpet. A tiny sniffle. Then, "It's dark." A pause. Then my name, a third time, like a hand finding a familiar rail. It wrecked me in a way I'm still mad about. I have made it through calls where a woman hid in a bathroom with the door jammed with a screwdriver, where a man counted his breaths between chest compressions, where a kid whispered their address from a closet while footsteps passed the door, and I did not shake. But this made me shake. I typed into the CAD, unknown caller, child's voice, repeated name. I wrote my own name, even though you're not supposed to, just to see it in the world, to prove it lived outside my head. The line dropped again at 28 seconds. Twice is... and a glitch. Twice is a pattern waiting for a name. I wanted to be practical. I wanted to think about stray signals, about voice-over IP ghosts, about someone spoofing with a radio, about some smart kid who found our admin number and was beating quiet breaths into a microphone to fool me. I wanted that explanation so badly I could taste it like a coin. Gail escalated the ticket. Telecom sent a tech during daylight to shake our closets and check the D-mark. He came in with a tool case and a smile that didn't reach his eyes because he didn't want to insult us by calling us wrong. He checked the punch-down blocks and the cable runs and the rack where the old trunks would have lived if they still did. He found dust where there should be dust. He found nothing else. He asked me what exactly I heard. I told him a breath and a name. And I didn't say the part about how it was my childhood mouth using my grown name, because saying that aloud makes you sound like someone who might need the other kind of phone number. The third night, just before 2:17, I took my headset off and listened with both ears to the room. There is ambient sound most people never hear. The tiny wheeze of the vending machine, the chirp our dispatch software makes when a unit clears, the way the HVAC coughs every time the doors to the lobby open. Markers you learn without knowing you learned them. It grounds you. When the legacy key lit, the room seemed to move backward, like an elevator starting down. I almost didn't answer. Then I did. "A1. What's the address of your emergency?" I said, and there was my voice overlaid on my voice. Not later, not earlier, but exactly with it, like two recordings aligned at the same 0 point. And right in the middle of my sentence, I heard myself, not my present self, the other one, say my name the way a person says a word they've just learned, testing it for sharp edge. I don't know what it wants. I don't know if it's a mistake in a system or a loop in time or just the kind of night sound that slips into a headset when your guard is down and makes a shape out of you. I do know that at 2:17, my mouth is careful with names. I speak like I'm putting something down that might break. I do know that every time the legacy key pulses, I feel a pressure behind my breastbone like a hand keeping me from standing, as if I am in a doorway between rooms and someone is counting my breaths for me. We never got an address. We never got a call back. The log shows 3 calls with 0-second ring times and 00s and incident numbers that don't fit our sequence. Officially, nothing happened. Off the record, I bring a tiny recorder of my own now, one of those modern ones you can't hear running. When I play it later, right where the child breathes in, the timestamp jumps from 2:16:59 to 2:18 like it's skipping a scratched groove. It makes sense that nothing holds still forever, not time, not voices, not names. But there's a part of me, the childish part that believes in having a flashlight to point at the dark, that wants to think if I could just answer the question the right way. Is this home? The calls would resolve. The training says to avoid promises you can't keep, so I say, I'm here. And in the quiet after the line drops, I hear my younger mouth try to make that phrase too, like a person learning to say what they most need to hear. I don't tell this to volunteers because once you hear it, you start listening for it everywhere, and that's no way to work in the woods. Most days, being a ranger is logistics and small kindnesses, clearing blowdowns, handing out paper maps when the trail app freezes, pointing a kid toward a salamander and watching their whole life tilt toward wonder. Mornings are best, before the trailheads fill, when the light is soft and the creek is loud, and the birds stack their chatter in layers so neat you could map your route by sound. The chickadees mark the edge of the lot, the towhees scuff the brush line, the thrushes braid song through the draws. Even when it's quiet, it isn't. The forest is a kitchen between meals, always simmering. I keep my own rituals. Coffee in a stained metal thermos that tastes like the last 30 dawns. A check of the sign-in box at the kiosk for scribbled names and someone's ambitious loop in shaky pen. A glance at the weather on the real sky, not my phone. The day this started, the box held 2 names from the previous afternoon, a couple from out of state who had picked the Long Ridge loop and drawn a cheerful smiley face by back by dark. There was no line on the sign-out. That happens. People forget. But the lot still held their dusty sedan with a national park sticker sun-bleached to a soft ghost. A deputy's card tucked under the wiper told me the sheriff's office had already noticed. I called it in anyway. Radio check on Channel 3. Clear. The sergeant's voice, thin with early, asked me to sweep the first miles of the ridge while they assembled a team. Probably a dead phone and slow ankles, he said, which is the default prayer out here. I clipped on my kit. First aid, whistle, splint, a spare headlamp, extra socks because blisters are their own emergency, and started up the switchbacks where the ferns crowd the steps and the fur of moss. On the rail keeps a damp memory of every morning. The forest felt normal. There's always a ledger in my head. Crows on the snag, check. Bee fret over the late asters, check. Creek pushing last night's rain, check. Far off rattling clack of woodpecker beak on dead wood, check. It anchors me. I don't carry God out here, not in any way that counts for church, but I believe in the honest accounting of what lives. Even a silence has a sound to it if you listen. Wind in the canopy, the whisper of needles to needles. The day had that sound. I found fresh prints on the steeper bits. 2 pairs of boots, one heavier, one lighter, one toeing out a little on the left like an old injury. They weren't careless prints. No skidding on the duff, no cutting switchbacks. I like people when their feet tell the truth. Half a mile in, I found where they'd stopped. Scuffed dirt by a downed cedar, a shiny wrapper tucked in the split of the bark like a hopeful attempt at leave no trace. I tucked it in my pocket and kept on. The light shifted as the ridge eased and the path ran along a beaver pond where the water sits like a held breath and the cattails lean like gossiping old men. Frogs, usually. Dragonflies drawn in blue hyphens. Red-winged blackbirds. Show-offs. It should have been a chorus. I didn't clock it at first. I noticed my own boot on a patch of mud and thought, that print will be gone by noon. Then I noticed what wasn't there. The frog's chuckle had been turned down so far it might have been memory. The blackbird's reed-top whinny didn't cut the air. The creek, a creek that will argue with rocks even in drought, seemed to hum instead of speak, like sound had been folded under itself and smoothed flat. It wasn't the silence you get before weather. I grew up with that sky-green hush that means something wide is coming fast, your skin telling the truth your eyes don't see yet. This was different. It felt applied, like a rule. I realized I could hear the zipper teeth on my jacket when I moved, the wet pull of fabric, the soft grit of my tongue against my teeth in my own mouth. I stopped and held my breath to make the whole world exhale. It didn't. Somewhere behind my ribs, a little animal clawed at the idea of leaving. The radio crackled once, just the idle burp of a signal trying to be born, and then it went so clean I wondered if I'd bumped the volume by mistake. I tapped the knob. Nothing changed. When the wind came, it moved the slats of the cattails but didn't make a sound doing it. I checked the time without knowing why. 7:14. 2 minutes later, though I didn't know it then, I would have something I've been trying not to keep. At 7:16, I stepped off the trail to examine a clear set of boot prints on the pond's fringe. A broad tread with a split lug that matched what I'd been following for half a mile and a narrower pair beside it. The mud was the right kind for reading, firm on top, pudding underneath. But when I touched the edge, it held its shape like cooled wax. The leading prints walked into the water. That happens more than you'd think. People wade in up to their knees to splash their faces or take a photo with the lily pads. What didn't make sense were the prints that came back out. They were the same size, the same stride length, the same outward turn on the left. But the edges had slumped as if sun had had its way with them for weeks. The pattern of the lugs, that sharp triangle cut into soft earth, looked rounded, like rubber gone lazy with age. A weak crack radiated from the heel, where the suction of the mud should have made a clean pull. Instead, it fractured like dried clay. On the rightmost print, a maple leaf had been stamped in deep, its veins pressed into the mud with such definition it looked fossilized. Every leaf on the ground in that cove was whole and wet and green turned October brown, but still veined with life. The trapped one under the print was papery, as if last year had pressed itself into this year's mud. I crouch, and until the knee of my uniform pants, wicket up the cold and put my fingers to the upslope print, the older-seeming one. The surface gave and powdered under my nail. The print that led into the pond, the fresh one, took my thumb and bounced back as if I'd poked a patient cheek. I don't know how long I stayed there tracing both paths, my mind trying to be fair and failing. The hummed undertone in the ground swelled, not loud but insistently present, like the sound of your own blood when you cup your ears, the low motor of living you can usually ignore. I felt it in my teeth. I swallowed and it buzzed at the hinge of my jaw. "County 3 to Ranger Unit, you on?" The sergeant's voice hissed into being and then leveled out to nothing as if the air itself refused to carry it. I keyed up anyway out of habit. "Ranger 1, I copy," I said, and heard my voice small and sure, a proof of existence. I didn't get the courtesy of a retry from the radio. I was alone with it. The pond's surface had gone unreadable. When there's wind, you can see it in sketches on the water, or when the beavers move, you can track the V. This was a blank plate, a skin. Only on the far side, where the shore pinched into shade, tiny rings appeared and held, like some insect's last attempt to call a mate before the rule arrived. A dragonfly coasted low and stopped as if it had been pinned. I blinked and it was further off. The cattails leaned like people listening to each other and refused to rustle. I tested my phone's camera because evidence is the only thing that counts when you tell a story like this later. The screen came up black. I tapped again. The camera bloomed to life with the date in the upper corner wrong by decades. 01/01/1970, like the sort of prank tech pulls when it wants you to know you aren't the boss of anything. I followed the outbound prints 2 paces onto the dry bank. They were few. Whoever had come back up had stood there and then taken measured steps away. The trail of fresh prints, the ones leading in, had a little hop where the lighter member had tested the mud, a skip in the stride. The outbound had none of that play. They marched. When I held my boot over one to compare, the smell that came off the ground was wrong. Not swamp, not rot. Old paper, old attic paper with mouse dust in it, and the sweet dry of long-kept things. The hum underfoot crested at 7:17, or maybe the number matters only because I want it to. I could feel the beat of my own pulse misalign with it, and for a moment I thought I'd throw up, which is not something I admit often. I called out, "Hello, Park Ranger, you okay?" And the word okay went out like a bead dropped into wool. My throat tightened the way it does at altitude. Though I was standing maybe 6 feet above a pond, I've circled on maintenance 100 times without drama. A ribbon of sweat ran down my side, and I could hear its small journey as if it was the loudest thing on earth. I am not a diver, and the pond is not a place for diving anyhow. 4 feet of water over 2 of black muck that eats a boot if you give it the chance. But I knelt and plunged my hand in up to the wrist just to touch something. The cold went beyond cold and wrapped my bones with a clarity that, for half a second, felt like relief. When I pulled my hand free, my skin looked wrinkled like I'd been in for an hour, not 3 seconds. I flexed my fingers and the wrinkling smoothed too fast, like a time-lapse in reverse. I dried my hand on my pants and left a print that looked like it had been there since spring. I took 1 step back because the part of me that knows about edges and the price of ignoring them had woken up and was tugging me by the sleeve. The air tasted metallic, a penny under the tongue. I said, "I'm here to help," which sounded foolish even to me, and then the far end of the pond dimpled with a set of ripples that moved inward instead of out, round after round collapsing toward a point I could not see. The The hum sank, almost playful, as if it was following those circles down. Then, so small I doubted it even as I heard it, the whispery tick of a wren from the brush line, a single syllable of the normal world. It cracked the surface of the hour like a fork tapping a glass. The creek cleared its throat. Somewhere a crow rasped its rude morning commentary. Sound, living sound, climbed back into the trees as if nothing had happened. My radio came alive mid-sentence. "Unit, status?" the sergeant asked, the rest of his check-in bleeding into me like a tape unpaused. I keyed up and said, "I'm at Beaver Pond. I've got sign. I need another set of eyes." My voice had that too calm quality I recognize in people who are trying to stay inside their skin. I don't know what he heard in it, but he said he was sending 2 volunteers from the lot. I watched the outbound prints look older by the second, the tiny flakes at their edges unlatching and drifting in a wind that hadn't been there a moment earlier. I flagged the scene the way we do for search. Pink tape on a willow branch, GPS waypoint logged, photos from my phone that came out fine the second the hour let go of us. In the images, the date is correct. The prints look ordinary through the screen. Mud is mud is mud. So I bent with a ruler and the scale tags from my kit and tried to make proof anyway. When the volunteers arrived, I walked them through what they were looking at without saying the part about older and younger mud, because you learn quickly that your words can turn perfectly normal evidence into nonsense if you let your mouth get ahead of your hands. We cast 2 prints, one inbound, one outbound, with the plaster mix that kicks too fast when you need it to be patient and never sets when the cloud cover changes. The inbound print came out like a charm, the lugs crisp, the tiny pebble trapped in the heel forever. The outbound print dried chalky, and then when I lifted it, it crumbled between my fingers. Not like pee, not like plaster fails, like stale bread. I watched the fragments sink back into the shallow impression as if the ground had been waiting to eat them. The search widened. We found a candy wrapper and a dip in the trail, the same brand as the one I'd fished from the cedar split, except the one on the trail had gone brittle and opaque like old cellophane left on a windowsill. We found a water bottle with a scuffed label and an expiration date 3 years out, but the aluminum cap had a blush of rust around the threads as if it had been left in damp for months. We found nothing of the hikers themselves. Around noon, we pulled back. Afternoon teams went out. A K9 unit worked the ridge and circled the pond, and at the spot where the footprints led into the water, lay down and put his head on his paws, which his handler wrote in the log as "alert, then de-escalate," a phrase that doesn't help in a briefing. I went home with mud dried in a fine crackle on my pants and took a shower so long I ran out the hot water and stood in the cold until I didn't trust my skin anymore. I don't pray, but I counted the things in my apartment that make noise. The fridge motor, the neighbor's laundry machine through the shared wall, the loose fan in the bathroom, and let them surround me like proof that sound is simple and comes when called. That night, at 7:16, my apartment turned so quiet I dropped a glass on the counter because the sound of it was too much. The hum that had been under my boots at the pond found me in the floorboards and hung there, just at the edge of sense. Rationalization is a tool, and I used it like a wrench. Pipeline maps? Checked. There's a gas right-of-way 2 miles west, a buried line that sometimes sings when the pressure does a thing. Birds don't care about metal singing, and the maps put it nowhere near the pond. Temperature inversion? Maybe. Some kinds of weather. Lay sound down and make it travel weird. But inversions don't fingerprint boot prints or wrinkle a hand like a day in the bath in 3 seconds. The volunteers suggested a prank, a local messing with city hikers and rangers for sport. Could be, except the mud doesn't prank. The mud doesn't learn how to look older. 2 days later, a deputy 3 ridges over picked up a woman walking down a Forest Service road in damp socks, carrying a boot by the laces like a dead thing. She gave her name. It matched the sign-in box. She had a story, like a shirt washed too thin. Threads, no fabric. "We wanted to cool off our feet," she said. And then, when asked about time, she said, "It was quiet. I could hear my drop of sweat go down my back." They took her to the hospital because that's what you do. Her labs were normal. Her phone had drowned. Her skin had that water-wrinkled look in places you wouldn't expect. The man she'd hiked with, boyfriend, brother, was found the next afternoon sitting on a stump 5 miles from the pond. He said almost nothing. He asked what month it was. He carried a watch that had stopped at 7:17 and started ticking when the deputy set it on the dash. When I went back to Beaver Pond on my own, days later, I told myself it was for closure, as if the land offers return policies. The birds were themselves, busy, rude, practical. The pond had its gossip back, dragonflies stitching loops into air. I found the spot by the willow where we'd flagged, and the prints were gone the way prints go, stomped by search boots and smeared by weather into a general truth. People were here. When I stepped into the patch of shade where the outbound prints had been, the hum put its hand on my sternum and pressed, light as a suggestion. I stood very still. The air tasted like old paper again, for as long as it takes to decide something you can't explain. Then a wren scolded me, Frau. I'm a twig so close it felt personal. I'm supposed to say here that I don't believe in anything, or that I do, and tie this up with a bow that makes it feel like a story that earned its end. I can't. I learned to listen to absences the way other people listen for thunder. An hour can be a hole you step into. The birds don't leave, they wait, or something waits them. The creek doesn't stop, it holds its tongue. The ground hums like a machine someone forgot to turn off, as if underneath it all there's an engine that keeps time badly and sometimes asks for a minute back to fix itself. We never wrote hour without birds in any report. The sheriff called it an anomalous auditory observation and closed it when both hikers went home, even though the man kept asking if his beard had been this gray before, and the woman returned a week later to leave a bouquet of wildflowers by the beaver-chewed stump without stepping off the trail. In my field notebook, the day has a star and a single line, 717, pond. Underneath that, in smaller writing I don't remember making, 3 words I heard in my head like a quiet directive. Do not linger. I didn't. But sometimes, between my ribs, the little animal lifts its head and listens. And when the hum starts in my apartment floor around dinner, I turn on the faucet and let the noise be mine. Nights at the hospital switchboard don't sound like what people think. It's not phones screaming all at once. It's a drip, one ring, a swallow, a soft clack as my finger taps the transfer key. Sometimes it's quiet enough that the vending machine down the hall sounds like it's breathing, and the fluorescent hum in the acoustic ceiling tiles breaks into 2 notes I hear more clearly than I hear my own thoughts. You learn to sort sounds without looking up. IV pump alarms are thinner than telemetry tones. The pneumatic tube sighs in the walls like a tired person, and cafeteria refrigerators give off a long, low vowel that makes you want to step outside. I am the one who answers when the outside calls in, and I am the one who stitches inside to inside when night makes the hospital borderless. I sit in a windowless room on the 3rd floor, a leftover utility closet turned nerve center. 2 monitors, a headset that pinches until your ears forget they're your ears. A binder the size of a family Bible with numbers nobody has updated since the year nurse managers still faxed memos. The software we use to route calls is bright as a children's toy and just as literal. Each unit is a square, each extension a tiny digital bead I slide from line to line with the mouse. There are only a handful of us who like this shift. Some people say that's because of the codes. You hear the overhead announcement and then the world tilts without asking. But that's not it. I like the late hours because voices level out at night. People ask for what they need without the daylight social around it. We have hold music. If you've ever been on the other side of it, I'm sorry. It's a cheap, looped thing from a vendor who swears it's calming. Tiny keyboard. A wet, breathy flute that isn't made by lungs. 16 bars of nothing trying very hard to be something, ending with a 3-note figure that rises like it wants to resolve and doesn't. If you listen long enough, you can tell which floor you've got on hold by the way the track breaks at the splice. ICU has a hiccup at measure 9. Mother Baby drops a beat just before the fake flute comes in. Psych plays a version with an extra measure that never decides what it's doing. I used to make a game of it to keep my brain from going flat, guess the unit by the loop before I check the caller ID. The first time I heard the story about the East Wing, Delaney, was my first week. Orla from Days was training me and showing me how to double park a call on an internal line so you don't lose it when pharmacy rings on top of a mom trying to reach a pediatrician on call. You'll see weird stuff after midnight, she said. Not in a spooky way, just like you'd say, the elevators get dumb in the rain. She told me Delaney used to be oncology and palliative before the fire back in '92. A short in a laundry room. Everyone got out, or that's the official. The wing has been sealed ever since. Guts ripped out, hallways boarded, the overhead sign covered with a blank plate. We still get calls from those extensions sometimes, Orla said. Ghosts in the switch. Telecom says it's the way the old trunks are tied in. You transfer them to the operator and let them ring out. She shrugged like a person who had decided she had already assigned that category of thing to the world and put it on a shelf. You'll know it by the hold music. It's off. I didn't ask what off meant. I figured she was being poetic about the psych version. But on my second Friday night alone, I saw a gray tile pop up on the software map with a label I had never seen. Delaney. It didn't light like a live call. It glowed like my cursor had left a smudge. I watched until it faded. If I tell you I told myself a story about a UI glitch and forgot about it, I'll be lying. I didn't. Forget. I put a sticky note on the bottom of my left monitor, Delaney, because sometimes writing a word down makes it stay small. Between midnight and 3, the switchboard is a kind of church. Families who were brave all day let fear turn into questions. Nurses who sounded clipped at 8 p.m. let warmth leak into their voices when they call to see if a patient's daughter made it downstairs. The security guard buzzes up to say he's doing a round, so nobody walks off with you. I page residents who never say thank you. I transfer the same man to the same room 3 times because he keeps forgetting he already said goodnight. The hold music repeats like a lullaby that was never good enough to lull anybody. I learned every seam of that loop. I can sing it in my sleep. Sometimes I do. Around 2:40, the building gets a pulse. You can't measure it. You only know it if you live inside the board long enough. The elevators rest between calls. The unit clerks stop stapling. The cafeteria ovens shudder off their last cycle and click into their slow night mode. The air shifts like a person rolling over. A small shame. I liked that minute because it felt like I was holding the thread that tied all of it together, and if I didn't tug it, the night would drift away from itself. That was before the extra phrase appeared, the one that didn't belong to any vendor loop or any floor I could name. It was 2:45 when the call that shouldn't exist lit up my console. I know the time because I have a habit of glancing at the wall clock whenever the overhead page chime triggers, and there wasn't one, and the motion still tugged my eye. On the display, source, Delaney 4E, XT 0412. The extension format didn't fit any of ours. We haven't had 4-digit room extensions since the upgrade. The E in 4E twitched me. East. Delaney was east. I pressed the soft key to answer, and the line opened on nothing flat and full like a fog. Hospital operator, I said, because that's what the script says. How may I direct your call? Silence, then the kind of rustle that makes a picture in your head, a sleeve against a handset, a throat-clearing swallowed. The hold music came in, but not because I'd put anyone on hold. It bloomed under the line like I had stepped into a lobby where it played at the edge of hearing. Same cheap synth, same flute, but at the end of the 8 bars, the little 3-note rise was followed by 4 more notes, low and close together like a child humming to themselves. 4 notes that, if you tapped them on your knee, spaced themselves exactly like the syllables of my name. Not just the count, the rhythm of it. 2 quick, 1 long, a short catch. I didn't know that then. I only knew I leaned toward the sound, as if my body recognized it before my mind did. Operator? The voice was thin, female, late night afraid and trying to be reasonable about it. Can you transfer me to 4 East, bed 12? It won't stop. A beep sounded in the background, low, patient, a machine that had been ignored longer than it liked. A second beep, slightly out of time with the first, like 2 clocks in the same room falling in and out of sync. 4 East was decommissioned, I said before I could stop myself from saying anything at all. Where are you? Bed 12, she said, a rustle. I'm ringing you because the nurse button is... She stopped as if someone had put a hand over the mouthpiece. Please, it keeps calling. I keep hearing... The hold music swelled, and over it, that extra 4-note figure stitched itself to the end of the phrase again with awkward sincerity, like someone learning the tune by ear, the first time I thought I was hearing wrong. I tried to buy us a kind of time by making the computer dance. I typed 4E into the bed directory, even though I knew what would happen. In daylight, the search returns an error. Unit does not exist. At night, the box gray-lit and retique. Earned a ghost entry in a font our software doesn't use. 4E12, status, closed. It flashed, as if it was being written and erased faster than my eyes could decide how to see it. I hit the supervisor page because my hands like following procedures when my brain can't. One moment, I said, which is a promise you're not supposed to make. I heard a sound through the line that wasn't a person sound. It wasn't the beeps. It wasn't the song. It was a little crackle like paper catching fire, and then not. Who are you trying to reach? I asked. Trying to get something I could share later in a rational way, a name we could check, a family member who could call me back on a real line and be angry in a way that counted as a complaint instead of a confession. Just transfer me to the other bed, the voice said, as if she didn't understand my question or as if the question had been wrong all night. I keep hearing him. The bed keeps ringing. The light's not lit. It shouldn't be ringing if the light's not lit. Her breath hitched. The extra 4 notes leaned in again. Tiny, unskilled, sweet. I keep wanting to tell you how exactly those 4 notes spelled my name, but if I do, I'll make it sound like a trick. It wasn't a trick, it was the shape of the way people have always said me, pressed into the end of a song that never had room for it. The line jittered, the hold music jumped back a bar, the beeping in the background stuttered into alignment and out again the way 2 heart monitors will if you stand between rooms. Delaney 4 East doesn't exist anymore, I said, gentler, because now that I'd said it once, I felt the foolishness of insisting on my reality over someone else's in the middle of the night in a building designed to argue with time. It's here, she said so softly I almost didn't hear it. The words sounded like a person standing in a dark room telling themselves the furniture is where they remember it. He keeps asking. The line bent. I think I heard the question, but it might have just been the shape of a question in the hold music. Is this? The calling tone clicked, the kind the phone makes when a page goes out overhead, the 3 soft chimes, and for a second I heard that chime under the flute like a syncopation. Then a rattle like the handset had knocked against a bedside rail. Please, she said, and her voice had gone smaller than the song. It won't stop calling if no one answers. I clicked the blind transfer to 4E12 because I wanted an action more than I wanted a solution, and the software accepted it, queued it, and then returned the call to me with a polite bleep that meant there was nowhere for it to go. The extra 4 notes at the end of the loop landed on themselves exactly as the call cleared. The gray Delaney tile on my board winked out. I sat with my finger on the transfer key like I'd just promised a stranger I'd stay, and then I'd left anyway. The wall clock moved its second hand in a slow, fair sweep. When I let my hand drop, the headset wire stuck to the sweat on my wrist in a way that made me realize I was shaking only by what my skin did. I opened the help ticketing system and typed the words, originating extension, not in service, in a field that asks for facts without commentary. I didn't mention the song. I didn't mention my name in it. I didn't mention that after the call cleared for a few beats, the hold music hung on the line like a smell that won't leave a room. It called back at 2:45 the next night. Same origin, same ask, the extra notes stitched to the tail of the loop, more sure of themselves, as if whatever was learning how to hum my name had practiced. I answered because that's what I do. I transferred to nowhere because I didn't know what else to do. After 3 nights, I recognized the way she took a breath before she said please. On the 4th night, she didn't say anything at all. The song played. The beeps kept time with each other for a while, and the end didn't. And the soft question, is this, went nowhere. Each time, the gray tile faded from my board like a dream you can almost tell someone until you try. There are things I can tell you that are useless. Telecom pulled logs and said the Delaney analog trunks were physically pulled in '99 when they renovated, and that any line labeled Delaney in our call center software exists only as a stale reference in a list that should have been purged. They told me to power cycle the console. I did, even though I know rebooting a question doesn't change the kind of answer it wants. The help desk escalated my ticket to a cheerful systems engineer who left me a voicemail with a laugh in it. Ha, spooky switchboard. I'll archive that Delaney entry for you. He did. The next night it appeared again at 2:45, and when he called me back a day later, he said our database didn't show any edits. You sure you're not looking at a different list? He asked, the way people ask, are you sure you're cold? When you're shivering, as if your body has it wrong. I tried to turn it into something a person with a regular life could hold. I asked Nora in clinical engineering if a background somewhere could pull audio from an old loop into a live one. She told me a story about infusion pumps picking up a radio station and playing faint country music during a night shift until they re-shielded a cable. But that was RF, she said, shrugging. Radio's out there, looking for a mouth. Dead copper doesn't sing. I nodded like that settled it. Later, at home, my refrigerator motor kicked on, and for the first time I heard the end of the hold music in the way it sighed off. 3 notes, and then 4 that didn't belong. The 4 arranged so exactly like my name that I said, stop, out loud to my kitchen. After the first week, I started watching the bed directory after midnight like a person waiting for a light to skim on under a door. 4E12 would wink into existence at 2:44:58, a gray line in a font that didn't belong to our software, and it would vanish at 2:47 as if it had never been. Sometimes it listed an occupant, unknown. Twice it showed a surname that matched no patient in any system I have access to. Once the occupant field populated with my surname and a first initial that could have been anyone's. I took a picture with my phone, hands shaking, and the screen came out white, the way cameras do when the light is not the problem. It would be clean to say this, any of it, ended with an answer or even with a choice. Instead, the hold music followed me. The elevator in my apartment building has a fan that will, if you are the only person in it at 11 at night, make the exact rise at the end of the loop and then hum the little 4-note tail with such insistence that I have to step out and let the doors close so something can finish a song I never asked to hear. The turn signal in my car when I sit at the edge of the hospital parking structure at 2:43 and watch the lights of the wards blink and pause and blink again has a left-right tick that for 6 beats spells my name in the rhythm I didn't want to recognize. I slapped the steering wheel once, just the flat edge of my hand, to make the sound stop meaning something, and the horn bleated and a security guard turned his head like I'd shouted. We are not supposed to promise on the line. You never say it's going to be okay. You never say help is on the way without the units on the board moving toward the address. You give facts with kindness around them. You stay. The 4th night, when the Delaney call came in and the extra notes landed with a confidence that embarrassed me, the voice didn't ask for a transfer. The beeps in the background had stopped. The song played into itself, and I realized the thing I had refused to allow into my mouth. The 4-note tail wasn't a melody being added, it was a name being called, and whoever was learning to hum it was asking a question I knew from somewhere else. Is this home? No one said it, the song did. Operator? I said, and I heard the soft rattle again, handset against metal. My left hand hovered over the nurse page for a unit that doesn't exist. I had this ridiculous thought that if I paged, the overhead would speak a thing that would make a shape I could live with. My finger trembled and didn't press. On the line, the 4 notes repeated, and my name unwound into the air like a string trying to tie itself to a bow. I said the only thing left I had that felt true and not a promise. I'm here. The line cleared. No click, no sit tritone, just a space where sound used to be. The gray tile went dark, the clock ticked into 2:47, and the board filled back up with the ordinary. Pharmacy, lab, someone from housekeeping asking for a key to a locked room. I went to the bathroom down the hall and ran the faucet just to make a noise that didn't know my name. When I looked at myself in the mirror, I had that washed-out look you get under hospital lights where your eyes are all pupil and sleep is a rumor other people spread. A week later, I walked past the blocked entrance to the east corridor because security was propping the door to run a cable for a training in the conference room. The sign that used to say Delaney East had been covered so long the cover plate had yellowed around the screws. The seam of the door whispered cold into the hall. I pressed my fingers to the gap because curiosity wins when you don't want what you want. All I felt was air. Air and that small, low vowel a refrigerator gives off when it settles into its night. 4 slow notes rode the end of that breath, and I stepped back, almost laughing at myself because you can't be haunted by a motif, not the way you're haunted by a person, except I am. I don't have proof that would convince anyone who didn't already hear it. I don't know what the extra phrase is for, or what answering it would change, or what's it. It would happen if I typed my own name into the bed directory on purpose at 2:45 and hit transfer and let whatever it is finish singing. On my desk, under the monitor, the sticky note with Delaney has gathered lint and coffee stains until the ink looks like it's trying to unwrite itself. My headset smells like plastic, and my hair and the citrus cleaner housekeeping uses on Thursday mornings. And somewhere between 2:44 and 2:47, in a building that understands too much about thresholds, something keeps adding my name to a song that doesn't deserve it. When the call comes in, I answer. When the line clears, I sit still until the room remembers that sound is supposed to be an ordinary thing. I don't know why I'm telling you this, except to put the weight somewhere else for a minute and maybe to ask if you hear it too. I was the guy with the keys at our community rink, the one who turned off the lights, coiled the hoses, parked the Zamboni with its big square nose pointing toward tomorrow, and walked the chain through the doors, like you'd thread a needle. If you've never been alone in a rink after hours, it has its own weather. Cold that isn't wind, just a constant stole laid over your shoulders. The compressors thrum in the plant room like a sleeping animal you don't want to wake. The whole building smells like rubber and coin, a faint ammonia note from the brine, and the sugary wet of yesterday's hot chocolate ground into concrete by tiny skates. People think ice is a flat thing you put on top of a floor. It isn't. It's layers you keep alive. You build it with thin floods, sealing the paint and the lines, making a pale, clean world in quarter-inch increments. You learn to hear when the blade is just right, the Zamboni squeegee giving the ice back to itself, the wash water lifting the sugar snow into the tank. When I drove, I liked the moments when the rink looked like poured glass and the only marks were the steam ghosts from my breath drifting up to the rafters. Closing has a ritual tight enough to be superstition. I kill the bright metal halide lamps in banks so the sheet can cool without the sudden shock. I hang the nets. I check that the edges are dressed and the goal creases haven't feathered into the neutral zone. I unplug the timekeeper console and lock it in the scorer's box. The scoreboard, ours is an old one, red digits, buzzer that sounds like a sick foghorn, goes dark when I throw its breaker. The penalty clocks die with it, the little mute eyes above the boxes closing. When the big lights snuff, the emergency strips along the aisles make a dusk you can walk in, and I stand at the top of Section B for a minute longer than I need to, listening to the building think, IK. Now every sound this place makes. The expansion pop when the slab decides to move a quarter inch. The distant whine of the HVAC dampers turning the air over between the lobby and the rink. The little metallic churr the dasher screws give after a busy game when they've been rattled by checks. Even the way sound skates across the glass, high and tight, like coins in a jar. So when I tell you I heard blades after the close, clean, practiced arcs on a fresh sheet with no people in the building, you need to understand I wasn't hearing pipes, or the Zamboni tank settling, or a dropped puck rolling. I heard a good edge. It was a Tuesday on my second month with the Keys. Figure had just finished. A handful of girls and one quiet older guy with a coach who talked in a low voice and clapped softly when he wanted a change. They'd left a clean mess of little white commas along the boards, not the deep gashes hockey leaves. The last public skate had been quiet. I'd resurfaced, put the machine in its bay, plugged in the heater, and done my walk. The scoreboard breaker was off. I'd checked it twice because the last time I'd forgotten, the night manager had left me a note pretending he was OSHA. The rink sat there like it was waiting for a curtain to go up. The first sound was a single push out of the corner by the away bench. Not a scrape, a stroke, the kish of a sharp blade leaning into a curve. Then another, measured, like someone crossing the blue line in C-cuts. Ksh, ksh, easy as breathing. I stood with my hand on the gate latch because the brain wants to square what it hears with what it can see, and there was nothing to see. The ice caught the pink of the emergency lights and the dim gleam of the exit signs and showed me myself in the glass. A guy with a knit cap and a parka zipped wrong. No shadow cutting the line. No shavings kicked up. Just the idea of a skater moving the wind. A person who knows their body can when no one is watching. I told myself it was the slab talking. The ice will call to itself as it settles. It will purr and crack like a cat dreaming. I told myself it was the Zamboni tank releasing a breath. I told myself it was any one of 100 things that were not a skater on my clean sheet. Then I heard a tiny electronic pip that did not belong to any of those explanations. Sharp, patient, the sound of a cheap stopwatch clicking past a second. Another pip, and another, strictly spaced, and the hair on my wrist stood up because I knew that sound too, and it wasn't coming from the scorer's bench where it should live. I looked up. The scoreboard was dark, no digits, no corner decimal points winking. When it's off, it's off. We don't leave it in standby. The panel above the penalty boxes was a blank, dead mouth. But even with the display dark, I knew where the numbers would be if they were. My eyes have learned the HUD of this business, and standing there in the hush, the second pips counting, I could swear I felt the shape of 059 in the dark, the way you can feel a room you've walked in 1,000 times even with the lights off, like someone had laid the last minute over the sheet to see what we do with it. The pips kept time, steady as a metronome that never had to be wound. I walked the aisle down to the glass and put my palm to it, half expecting to feel the hum of a transformer, though the power was cut clean at the breaker. Cold glass, my own breath fogging a small, soft oval that bloomed and faded. On the fourth pip, from the far end behind the home goal, the ksh-ksh started again, a skater pivoting into crossovers. You can tell sloppy crossover from clean by the way the blade comes down. Messi puts a shuffle in the beat. Whoever this was, if it was anyone, had no shuffle. The sound landed sure and left room for the next without crowding it. I lifted the gate latch and let it fall quietly, out of habit. The ice, minutes old, would be so soft I could scar it with a thumb, and every mark tomorrow morning would tell on me to the first skater on. I wasn't going to step on it unless I had to. I leaned over the dasher to look for the tiny spray of shavings a hard push will throw. The sheet looked unmarked. Perfect, cold handwriting waiting for its first sentence. Still, the strokes moved, not all in one place. Corner to corner. On the 10th pip, I heard the dry little scratch of a toe pick near the top of the left circle, like a quiet question asked of a compliant surface. "Hey," I called soft so I wouldn't sound like a man shouting at nothing. "We're closed." The sound that came back wasn't a voice first. It was breath, someone gathering themselves to speak, condensing into the barest fog on the glass right at my eye level 2 panes down. I know where people breathe on the glass. It has a grammar, kids below the rail, adults above, coaches at the red line. This was in a place no one ever presses their face, as if someone were standing in the crease between panes. Then very close and small, like the voice came up through my hand on the glass instead of through air. "Move the line." I froze harder than the sheet. Move the line. Not it, not you. The next pip landed, and the cush shifted toward center. The blue line sat there in its place, the shade of faded pool water submerged under quarter-inch of clear ice. I know that line as well as I know a road's yellow stripe. I painted every fall with powdered paint and a long stretched string, so it will be true. And yet, looking down from the glass, I saw something I had never seen. A faint twin of that blue, a shadow line ghosting 3 inches toward the home goal. Not painted, not really there, but as convincing as a reflection that doesn't belong to you. I ran for the scores box because that is where the logic lives. If the scoreboard had some juice left, if someone had left a handheld timer, I could put my hands on proof. The box was as I'd left it. Console unplugged. Its green on LED dead. Drawer locked. I yanked it anyway, hard enough to bite my own hand with the metal lip. The pip ticked, regular as you like. I stood very still, ears open, and realized the beep wasn't coming from a box at all. It was off the air. The way the compressors hum is everywhere but nowhere if you try to find a speaker. I took the old luminous hand stopwatch someone had donated for public skate, tapped its button. It ticked, it clicked, it didn't beep. The sound upstairs kept its own counsel. Back at the glass, that ghost blue line had presence the way a habit does. The skater, let's call it that, was tracing ovals along it, outside edge to inside, the figure 80 you only see in old pictures from when they called this sport figures. I could tell which edge it was on by the way the sound landed, left a pause and returned, the toe pick only kissing down when the turn asked for it. No shavings, no marks, just sound moving in a way my body recognized from the one winter I tried to teach myself to do it. I found the roll of masking tape I keep under the bench for emergency paddle repairs and stuck a square to the glass right where the faint line was strongest. The next time the stroke went past that spot, the tape lifted itself a corner like a person exhaling under it. "Move the line," the little voice said again, not angry, something like a request you've made enough times to feel silly about. I looked along the painted blue, then 3 inches down the sheet where the ghost lay, then up at the scoreboard that showed me nothing and told me everything. 0:45 now in my head, though nothing glowed. I thought about the time we changed from the old figure sessions, patch, the old coaches called it, when they chalked lanes into the ice to practice school figures, to more hockey hours. The chalk used to sit in a dusty box by the Zambay W's. And I was a kid, a ghost of pale squares on the shelf after the chalk was gone. The last guy who'd held the keys before me told me they'd painted the first sheet in 98 wrong, put the blue lines a few inches off, and had to melt out and start again. He said it like a joke about someone else's math. I'd laughed. Now, fingers numb on the top of the dasher, I wondered about memory set into water and frozen, layer after layer, so faint you only feel it when you take everything else away. At what I think was 0:10, the pips sounded closer together, though I know seconds don't change length. The skater brought it to center. The ghost line drew itself like a thread through the middle circle for a breath and then drifted back, breaking where the paint made its own insistence. The breath on the glass near my face warmed to a circle and cooled. I stood there like a goalie too far out of crease and waited to see if I was about to be scored on. At 0:20, though again only a feeling of 0, the beep changed to a long idiot tone you could feel in your teeth. The kind our scoreboard throws when a period ends and the on-ice official bangs his stick on the glass to make me shut it up. There was no one to bang. The tone bled into the metal of the building and then stopped. The strokes faded, not like someone leaving ice, just like someone standing still, blades planted, the little feather of sound a person makes when they are letting themselves breathe again after concentrating. Then the sound that is nothing but the building alone. I stood there another minute, then another. I checked the breaker for the board again because stubborn men check doors they already locked. Dead. I went back to the glass, put my hand where the breath had been, and touched only cold. When I leaned farther over, looking for anything I could sweep and bag, I saw only when the emergency light reflected in a cert by the angle, the faintest of faint swales where the water had settled, like an old brushstroke under varnish. If you told me it wasn't there, I couldn't argue. If you told me I invented it, I couldn't prove you wrong. The only true thing I could say was that I packed up the night slower than usual because it felt like the rink had asked me for something and gone polite when I didn't know how to give it. The next morning I came in early and measured the painted lines like a man doing penance with a tape. The blue is supposed to be 60 feet from the goal line on our sheet. I laid the tape along the dashers, counted the little metal screws that bite the plastic. 60, true as ever. I measured center to crease, red to blue, blue to the far red, numbers sitting clean in their places. I told myself the ghost was a trick of the layering. Last year's paint faint under this year's, or a parallax from the glass. I told myself the beeps were from somebody's wrist timer left in a locker, until I touched every locker, found only forgotten socks and a broken mouthguard, and learned the difference between a thing that makes a sound and a sound that uses a building to make itself true. It came back, as things do that mean something to you even if you don't want them to. Not every night. Not on nights when the public session ran late, and the ice was still busy in the refrigeration coils. But on nights when the sheet had time to settle and the air was the right kind of still, 059 laid itself over us, and someone skated the ghost of a school figure along a line we didn't honor anymore. Once I set my phone in the scorer's box to record and walked away like the noise would act different if it didn't know I was listening. The audio file caught the pips, a little tinnitus whine between them, and the brief long tone. When I scrubbed along the waveform, there was a moment at the 30-second mark where the background got thicker, like a breath standing next to a mic. The file didn't show me anything a person would point at and say, "See?" It showed me, almost. I asked Walt, who ran the plant before me, about Patch. He rubbed his jaw where his winter beard never fully leaves in summer and said he hadn't heard that word in a long time. "Old days," he said. "Lines were temporary. We chalked them, laid a string and dusted. Girls had their lanes." He half smiled. "Coaches were particular where you put a line. There were arguments. Some of them liked to own the blue. Some wanted a hair over." He didn't say anything about a skater. He did say, "Scoreboard timer has a little emergency power for the controller memory, but it won't give you sound. You sure you're not hearing the plant?" I said I was sure. We both looked at the closed door to the compressor room like it might look back. The voice said it twice more over the next month. "Move the line." Once it sounded like a kid. Once it sounded like someone a few years older than me, tired but polite. I started keeping a strip of blue painter's tape in my pocket, and one night after the tone, I walked the gate open and, careful as if I was laying down a ribbon on a sleeping animal, I stuck the tape 3 inches off the painted blue, in the place the ghost wanted, then laid a shallow flood with a hose to seal it in for the morning. Stupid, maybe. Not regulation. It would come up during maintenance. The tape would turn into a line of silly, trapped bubbles by noon. I did it anyway because I wanted to see what would happen when someone came to the rink and saw a boundary where there shouldn't be one. In the morning, Mrs. Tate, the figure coach with the soft clap, tilted her head and said, "Oh, Patch," and split her kids along it without making a big deal. The hockey dads who come early to drink bad coffee and stretch hamstrings put their cups down, looked at it, grunted at me like I'd done something eccentric, and went back to their conversations about blades and mites and the one ref they hate. No one called me to the office. The kids traced their little 8s with their tongues stuck between their teeth and didn't care what the tape meant beyond space. That night there were no pips. There was the normal, zam wash, compressor hum, the building cooling its thoughts. I got cocky, which is the word you use when you forget how small you are in a place. The next time the pips returned, soft as the first fall snow sliding along the roof, I stood at the blue line and said, "Where?" The breath fogged the glass near my cheek and I stepped sideways and it followed. A little oval, traveling with me along the seam between the panes. Not playful, precise. I put my hand where the fog was, palm flat, and the cold bit into me to the bone in a way the rest of the glass didn't. "Here?" I asked. If anyone had walked in, I would have looked crazy, a man negotiating with a pain. "Move the line," the voice said, softer, as if embarrassed to have to ask again. I didn't pull out the tape that night. I stood until the long tone, and then I went to the breaker and flipped it off even though it was already off, like an exorcism for a thing that wasn't a devil. At home, the radiator in my apartment knocked once at midnight and my body braced because I thought it was the first pip. I laughed and then didn't. I started counting seconds while brushing my teeth or waiting for the microwave. I started hearing blades in the tires on rainy nights that quiche as someone takes a corner who knows how to corner. You cannot keep a rink out of your head if you sleep there as much as I do. It moves in with you and puts its skates in the hall. A month later, we did a repaint. End-of-year scope, seal coats, touch-up, remeasure. I took the template from the back room, the huge stencils for circles and creases, the long strings we snapped to mark lines. I set the blue by the book. 60 feet, measured twice. String tight enough to sing. Once the paint dried to chalk, I flooded to lock it in. Under the water while it was still a skin, I saw the faintest bruise of blue exactly 3 inches away from the real one, just for a count of 2, before the flood made the world again. No one else saw it. Why should they? Maybe I wanted it, and so I got it. Maybe memory is paint too, and it bleeds through if you look sideways. We had a mite game that night, the kind where the kids skate like anxious bees, and one of them always falls and laughs because falling is part of the job when no one tells you that yet. The building was full of bodies and sound and good, wet breathing. The buzzer worked when it should. The dads pounded the glass when a kid scored in chaos. I forgot to be haunted for a few hours. I didn't think about the line until after, when I did my walk and the building went back to its thin dusk and I looked down and saw, not tape, not paint, but a narrow, very straight drift of sugar snow exactly 3 inches off the blue, like someone had pushed a blade there with the softest pressure and left the whisper of their effort behind. I don't have an ending. I don't know if moving the line gave anyone what they wanted or even if there was a who to want. I don't think anyone died on our sheet, and if they did, I don't want to make their story into a moral about boundaries. I know only that the rink is a palimpsest, layers upon layers where things that mattered once don't disappear, they wait. Lines get painted and scraped and painted again, and still they remember where they preferred to live. When the pips come, they don't frighten me now. They make me careful. I stand at the glass and let my hand get cold and say quietly, I'm here. Sometimes I bring the tape, sometimes I don't. The scoreboard never lights during it. The long tone is never too loud. And when I chain the doors and turn off the last bank of lights, I walk past the blue and the ghost of blue and feel something in me step just to the side, like a person making room for someone else to pass. People think a data center is about computers, but mostly it's about air. Air cold enough to chap your knuckles, air that moves with a purpose through hot aisles and out cold ones, air that rejects every human smell you bring in because nothing living is supposed to happen in there. On nights I babysat the place alone. It was a landscape of disciplined hums. The UPS cabinets breathing like a choir of refrigerators, the crackle of static under the raised floor when you pull a tile with the suction cup, the infinite patience of blue status LEDs strobing the same message forever. Okay, 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 until they don't. My badge opened 3 doors. First got you into the office vestibule with the sad ficus and the laminated safety posters. Second got you through the man-trap into white space, where the world narrowed to aisles of black racks, patch fields, and the periodic table of your own habits. Third got you into the plant room where the generators slept behind roll-up doors, and the smell of fuel lived heavy, even when you pretended not to notice it. Tier 3 means maintenance without downtime. It means redundancy so thorough it starts to feel like a superstition. It means every night at 2 a.m., someone like me stares at a screen and says yes to patches that will never be thanked and only be remembered if they fail. We called it the maintenance window because by policy that's when change is allowed to pass through the membrane and not poison the day. Vendors logged in, we watched their mouse cursors jerk across our jump box like nervous birds. A cabal of approvals had signed off in daylight so that night could be quiet, and yet the air had a way of taking note when you touched a live thing. Between this building and the hospital across the highway was a seam of liminal stuff, sodium vapor streetlight, a strip of undeclared grass, a view through glass at ambulance bays where lives were calibrated while my world cared only for watts and BTUs and whether an LED chose to become red. I had a scanner radio on my desk because the night is long and I like to know what the outside is doing. It pulled traffic from the fire department, the county sheriff, sometimes the hospital's security if they forgot to encrypt their channel. Old Unaiden, hand-me-down from a ham neighbor who said radios taught you how to be a person by making you listen. Most nights it was comforting noise. 911 traffic we were not part of, codes that meant hurry without saying the word. This building's emergencies were underground and tightly scheduled. Theirs were above ground and immediate. I liked the comparison because it made me feel like I had a job that mattered in the quiet way. My console was a squat Dell with the good keyboard, the one that clicks like an older machine even if the rest of it is a slate of gray. A dozen shells open on the jump server, DCIM dashboard in one tab, syslog in another, a remote into the virtualization cluster in a third. To keep myself honest, I logged changes in a composition book because systems of record are perfect until you need paper. Coffee in a paper cup that made my mouth taste like cardboard if I forgot to drink water. Headphones around my neck that never went on because I needed to hear the building speak. All the rituals, the walk of the aisles with a flashlight I didn't need, the double check of generator fuel levels even though the sensors would have screamed at me if they were wrong, the habit of tapping the crack unit on the corner like you'd pat a dog that doesn't know it's a dog, kept me between the hum and the thought. I don't tell this to new techs because they don't need the idea in their heads, but there are hours when the noise loses its grain and becomes something smoother beneath, as if the building and everything running in it has settled into a single note. You feel it under your sternum more than you hear it. The nights you do the most touch work, fail one UPS leg to prove the other, test an ATS transfer, patch the hypervisors, are the nights that Note seems to notice you back. The hospital had its own weather. If you stand in our parking lot and look across, you can see the curve of the ER bay. In winter, when the air is clean and mean, the sound carries funny. Sirens compress to a thin keen. Footsteps in the snow sound too close. On the late nights, lights in their fourth-floor east windows, whatever unit that is. Blink and pause and blink again in a rhythm my eyes have memorized without permission. Once, on a break, I stood at the fence line and watched a med flight land, the helicopter's downdraft tumbling wrappers across the grass. And I felt a ridiculous longing to trade my kind of emergency for theirs, the kind with faces and names. Then I went back inside and squeezed the suction cup to lift a tile, and told myself drama is a flavor you can live without. I was on nights because nights fit me. The quiet is something I can breathe. I had a sister who used to tell me that meant I was avoiding real life. You pick the rooms where people aren't, she said, but gently, like she didn't want it to sting. She lived over in the north of town, in one of those tidy brick duplexes with a postage stamp yard and a dog who hated the mail. We texted and called like siblings who love each other from a distance and are careful with each other's time. If she had a nightmare and needed to hear someone say her name like it belongs here, she called me at 2 a.m. because she knew I'd be awake. I liked being the person who answered. We scheduled a maintenance window for a Tuesday. 02 home clock so 400 call. Virtualization hosts patching. The change advisory board had signed. The vendor had promised 0 downtime. I opened the ticket, set the status to implementing, and took a sip of cool, eyeing coffee while the building exhaled in its way. It was the kind of night I'd tell you was nothing special, except for the one new folder that wasn't there until it was. It blinked into existence on the jump box like a small, harmless error at first. A drive letter I didn't remember mapping. Z suddenly showed an Explorer under this PC, as if I'd just plugged in a thumb drive I never touched. That's on me, I thought, and checked my login script even though we don't do cowboy mappings. Clean. No Z. I opened a shell and typed net use. It listed Z as a remote. Klaus 127.0.0.1 spire arch, which made no sense because 127.0.00.11 is a loopback and we don't share loopback. I looked for the share in the local server manager. No share named Arch. No share at all. The window popped to the foreground. Z flickered like a wink and then settled. It held one folder. Hold. The word bothered me, like a half-finished instruction. Hold what? Hold when? Inside hold were files no one in my world should be making. Zip archives with names formatted like official documents. Last name, first name, dub. YY by MMDD, zip. The timestamps were to the second. 02-13-16, 02-17-09, 02-22-41. In a sick, practical way, the names were comforting because they suggested a human, a prankster tech making bad art. I clicked properties on one. Owner, NT Authority System. Size, anywhere from 73 KB to 204 KB. Created, the minute I was looking at it, like the folder had been catching up and now wanted me to see it working. I double-clicked an archive because of course I did. It asked for a password. I tried the sins. Password. Admin. Blank. No. I dragged one to my desktop out of reflex. It copied and sat there like a fly. When I double-clicked again, the request for a password felt personal, which is a stupid thing to say about a file. I right-clicked and cracked it open in 7-zip to list its contents. 1 PDF. Certificate of Lev. Birth PDF. Inside an archive in a folder that shouldn't exist on a letter that shouldn't map, while I ran patches on machines that were supposed to never notice me. The scanner on my desk clicked and sipped a conversation that had been going on without me. Engine 1 en route, a bored voice. Code blue, ICU, a clipped female over an open channel, and then silence because someone remembered the switch. The hospital's crisis and my little mystery wanted to braid themselves in my head. I forced my eyes back to what was mine. Procmon is holy when you don't know what you're seeing. I fired it up, filtered for Z. Watched file creates flicker by with system as the actor and a process name that made my tongue go dry. System. Parent PID. 4. Origin thread. Null. I have been doing this long enough to know when a machine is lying to make you go away. The virtualization patching completed without incident. My DCIM dashboard showed everything blithely green. In Z++ hold, new zip files kept appearing, 8-minute gaps, 3-minute gaps, a cluster of 2 within 60 seconds like double doors swinging. I took a second monitor and dragged the window over so I could pretend this wasn't what I was watching. I opened a new shell and ran dir.tc to list by creation time. The pattern didn't care about being seen. At 0304, a name landed that stiffened me in my chair, a common surname, but a first name I knew from a news story last week about a highway wreck. I opened a browser and, because people are ghouls, the paper had published an update with a timestamp. The times were off, an hour and change, like someone's clock set wrong or an article edited later. But the name and the day made something cold draw a line down my back. I told myself to stop. People die all the time and names repeat, and I have a mind that wants to match shapes. The folder was meant for me to see that night, or I was the person who happened to be sitting in the chair when something decided to perform. At 03:12:03, a file began to be born letter by letter, not a file sleigh. Ding into existence as a whole, but a name populating one character at a time, as if someone were typing it into the file name field and thinking about each keystroke. S, Sar, Sarah, Sarah, the underscore, middle initial, another underscore, my sister's last name, not our shared surname, the one from before she married and didn't change it because she didn't see why she should, her actual legal, then the date, her birthday, exactly in the format the others used. The timestamp at creation ticked, 03:12:04. I called her. My hand moved before my brain agreed. Phone to ear, the hum of the building in my bones. One ring, two. She answered with sleep in her voice. Hey, she said, you okay? You tell me, I said, and hated the way I sounded, like I had the right to interrupt her night and put something in it I couldn't take out. You're home? Yeah, genius. Her dog barked once in the background, the muffled ap-bap of a couch dog. What's wrong? Nothing, I lied, and my mouth went dry so fast I had to swallow and it clicked in my ear. I had a dream I was supposed to call you. The lie made us both safe for a beat. She laughed the tiny laugh she keeps for me. You don't dream, she said. The scanner trilled a 3-note chime that reminded me of something I couldn't place and then shut up. On my screen, the file finished its name. A heartbeat. The size updated to 0 KB, then 73 KB. Password protected, I knew without trying. My fingers shook and hit the wrong key, and a tilde painted itself in a place it didn't belong on my notes. Say your name, she said on the phone, playful, because this is our dumb pact when her anxiety breathes on her neck. One of us says the other's name so reality knows where to put us. I said hers. It sounded wrong to me because in the same moment on my jump box, her whole legal assembled itself into a format I had begun to recognize as the building's bad joke. I'm going to hang up and text you a photo of the dog so you can stop being weird, she said, because she is kinder than I deserve. We disconnected. A new file dropped in the Z drive before the dial tone reached my ear, a name I don't know, a time stamped across one of those windows in the hospital where lights pause and blink. I did not open my sister's file because I couldn't, but the truth is I did not open it because, in the kind of magical thinking that keeps you upright in a place where nothing alive is supposed to happen, not opening it felt like a way to keep her on the right side of a line. I pulled the Ethernet cable on the jump server because dumb actions help when you're drowning in smart ones. Z. Didn't unmap. The folder didn't stutter. I shut down the box, which you don't do when you are responsible for a place that prizes uptime like virtue. The screen went black. The hum of the room did not change because a single desktop does not alter the weather of a building. The scanner murmured something about a unit clearing a scene. In the dark glass of the monitor, I could see my own face like a bad reflection of a person who makes good decisions. I stood and walked a hot aisle because that is where I go when I need to feel something on my skin that isn't ideas. The back of the racks breathed on me like a dog who trusts you. I put my palms on a PDU and felt its low tremble like a distant train. I would like to tell you the folder was gone when I came back, that my practical sacrament had closed the window. It was there. The files waited like polite enemies. The patching completed and the ticket wanted a note. I typed, implement successful. I typed, no incidents. I typed nothing about the list of names that had asked to be born again in a place that rejects bodies. At 03:19:31, another file arrived. Not my sister's name, not mine. It was worse that it was Matt. In the morning, the vendor wrote, "Thanks for the smooth window" in the ticket because success sounds like cheer when nothing obvious breaks. I left the building into air that didn't feel like a filter had vetted it and sat in my car and watched the hospital across the highway crank through daylight as if night had not asked any questions of it. I texted my sister a dumb meme I knew she'd hate because our love is mostly bad jokes and timely coffee. She sent a picture of the dog anyway, as promised, his face shoved square into the camera like evidence of a simpler story. In my backpack, the composition book where I pretend to understand my life suddenly felt like a heavy, stupid prop. Rationalization is a wrench, and I have a whole set. Someone pranked me with mapped drive nonsense. Then how did they get local system to own the files? A scheduled task left by a consultant? Why didn't a scan with autoruns show anything? A drive-by file system glitch. Loopback shares aren't a thing, not on our configuration. A virus? Procmon would have told me something more useful than a process with no parent. I tried to frame it in language that would make sense to my boss. Anomalous mount shows during maintenance windows. Phantom SMB share populating with passworded archives. Possibly a lab artifact from pre-prod. The phone number for the hospital switchboard burned in my pocket like a dare. I went back through the logs that night and the two after that. The folder did not show during business hours. It winked in at 02:31. Every night my maintenance window was approved and active. It laid down names like stitches, each file's timestamp working like it had a job and a punch clock. I set up file system auditing and wrote a stupid amount of XML to catch object creates in that path. Event ID 4663s rolled in with subject fields that made me feel mocked. Security ID, null SID. Accesses, write data, process name, unknown. I tail-effed the log and felt like I was watching a room in my house be used by someone else while I sat in the hallway with my ear to the door. I tried to find a correlation beyond the hour and the hospital being the only place in sight where names change from present to past. I didn't want to call anyone there and ask them to match their saddest list to my worst folder. Instead, I took my scanner and sat in my car on my lunch break and listened like a creep, mapping times in my notebook when a unit said code blue, and writing down the file timestamps later to see if they lined up. It wasn't clean. The scanner missed more than it caught. Dispatchers get better at secrets every year. But on the third night, when a voice I recognized from Channel 3 said, time of, and did not finish because that's not for the radio, a file landed in Z, with a creation timestamp 1 second later. I would like to tell you I cheered because the world had been coherent for a count of one. I didn't. I felt like I had leaned over a rail in the dark and discovered there was nothing under me for a long way down. I didn't open my sister's file. I carried the not opening like an egg across consecutive days, delicate and dumb and precious to me. She was fine. She texted me about a sleepless night, about the dog waking to bark at nothing, about a dream she wouldn't describe because she didn't want to make it true. I asked if she'd check her smoke detectors because I needed to ask something safe. She assured me batteries chirp when they want attention and hers were quiet. My hands wanted to install oxygen sensors in her living room, and my brain wanted to find a line in my world that would tolerate that request. On the fourth maintenance window, at exactly 02:00, Z appeared before I approved the change. It held nothing for a full minute and then breathed out a single file, a name I know now but will not type here because I can't make someone else true like that. The folder warmed the room the way a fridge does when the compressor decay. IDs to talk. At 02:45 it slowed. At 03:12 it spelled a surname wrong, corrected itself and kept going. On my desk, the scanner radio clicked like a tongue. Security to East Corridor, a hospital voice said, and then embarrassed silence, like a person who had forgotten the world. I brought it up to my boss the fifth night because the weight of not telling had begun to turn to gravity in my chest. He listened with the kind of patience you give a person who is almost certainly describing a bug, but might also be describing an early warning. Log and isolate, he said. Do not propagate. We stood by my jump box at Euro 158, two grown men waiting for a drive letter like kids waiting for a ghost in a bathroom mirror. Z didn't appear until 02:18 that night because apparently the world likes an audience. When it did, the share path was not 1227.0 jars 1 par arch anymore. It was pashtars jars says hold. He looked at me and I looked at him and I said, I'll open a ticket with storage. He said, do not write a ticket with storage. He put a hand on my chair like he was grounding the building or me. I don't know which. Close the window, he said, meaning change the status. We'll move maintenance to days for a week. We both knew days were not a window. The week we didn't patch at night, nothing happened. Z did not show. The names had nowhere to be. My relief was a chintzy, embarrassing thing that smelled like superstition and new car. I slept. My sister slept and told me about it, and her dog barked at reasonable hours. The hospital across the highway lit and paused and lit again and did not ask me for anything. It was almost possible to believe I had been overtired and dramatic. Then a storm took out one of the utility feeds at midnight on a Sunday, and we executed our drills like professionals. Generator roll, transfer, power whiplash you can feel if you're leaning on a rack. The building I held. At 0203, Z arrived with a neat, unbothered map and a list of files that had apparently been waiting for me. There is a way to pull truth out of a file without opening it. You can hash it and watch the number turn into itself with reassuring math. I wrote a script to compute SHA 256 on every archive the second it landed and append it to a log with its file name and timestamp. The entries fell into place like a prayer bead rope. My sister's file had the same hash every night the folder mounted for a month. It was the kind of consistency that feels like comfort, until you understand it means nothing changes while you wait for it to. In the end, my not opening was a ritual that could not stay intact. A quarterly operations review demanded proof of night work, and I decided the only way to put this down was to make it a ticket with attachments in a system that could chew anything into a status. I plugged in a little sacrificial machine, air-gapped it, copied her file there, and asked 7-Zip to test the archive without extraction, because that felt like a compromise with whatever line kept me decent. It prompted for a password. My fingers moved without my permission. I typed my first name. It rejected me. I typed hers. The machine paused, thought, and then made a polite sound I have never heard a machine make in my life, like a person recognizing themselves in a photo. The test completed. Okay. Contents. 1 file. Name. Certificate of Live Birth.pdf. Size 102 KB. Encrypted. Yes. Method. AES 256. I didn't open the PDF. I can say that without lying. I closed the machine. I turned in my badge a month later, after a transfer I didn't ask for came with a pay bump I didn't want. I work days now in a building that's honest about people in it. When I pass a server room, I taste dry air in the back of my throat, and my hands remember the exact shape and temperature of a PDU. My sister still texts me at the wrong hour to say the dog did a funny thing, and I still sometimes call her for no reason. And we both forgive each other like it was rehearsed. There is a thumb drive in my desk with a copy of Z-Plot's Hold I tell myself I will wipe and don't. Some nights when the apartment is very still, the refrigerator sighs and a hum under that sigh finds the frequency in my chest that belongs to a building pretending it has no interest in the living. I know what the rational mind demands, that I name this a glitch, a prank, a persistent misconfiguration. I can wear those words like a uniform. But there is a part of me that believes in the idea of windows, because windows are how you see, and how you fall, and how you learn what a threshold costs. Maintenance is the kind of work that asks the world to stay the same while you change it without anyone noticing. Sometimes I think the world notices, and sometimes it files a form you don't know how to process, and it puts your name in the correct format, and it waits for you to open it, and it does not explain why it called this birth. Most nights, Channel 16 is just breath. A thin, saltless hiss that tastes like a penny on your tongue and makes your inner ear lean as if there's weather inside your head. You keep a scribbler open and a pencil sharp because typing feels too loud in the dark. You listen to the lake breathe. I'm a volunteer. Nobody pays me to do this. And I sit in a room the size of a storage closet over the marina office with a window that looks out on the breakwater and a VHF set that outlived 2 marinas before this one. The radio's faceplate is sun-peeled into a soft gray, the mic cord is stiff with age, and the speaker crackles on cold nights like old fat popping in a pan. It is my favorite thing in the world, and sometimes I wish I had never touched it. People picture distress as drama. Mayday screamed over thunder, but it's usually small things said calmly. Out of gas at the point, a shear pin gone, a kid on a paddleboard who doesn't know the word offshore, a couple in a rental pontoon finishing their fight in my ear because neither of them knows how to say we're scared without lighting each other on fire. We triage, we hand off to sector, we tell them to switch to 22A, we log time and coordinates in handwriting you can read later when you're tired and proud and a little ashamed of liking the role as much as you do. We eat stale pretzels and drink coffee that tastes like rope. We go home with the radio hiss in our bones and our own name sounding strange if someone says it out loud. Fog nights, you hear more than you see. The lake turns into an animal that moves without showing you where the head and the tail are. Sound skates, buoys moan from unexpected directions. The harbor hoist drums a little with whatever the air is doing. The lamp over the chart table hums, so you think there's a tone in your head until you hit it with your knuckle and it stops like a scolded child. We repair in N2 radios, one locked to 16, one scanning the work channels and weather. The second set is newer and keen. The old one is stubborn and forgiving, and hears a little deeper into the night than the spec sheet claims. I inherited the logbooks, grease-smudged paper ledgers with the marina's name stamped on the cover, dates in a desk clerk's careful hand, margins filled with notes from the men who sat this watch before me. The oldest book smells like mildew and pencil shavings and the shrug of 1,000 small emergencies. On slow hours, I read the past like I'm cribbing answers. Your brain likes patterns, especially when you keep one ear at a frequency most people never think about. That's how I found it. An entry from 19 years ago, a line of pencil so hard it engraved the page beneath. Mayday call, chords 41-86°, not water. A name, a vessel. The writing is strange, like whoever wrote it was trying not to press too hard and failing. I chalked it up to tropoducting, VHF writing a temperature inversion like a slip and sliding sound hundreds of miles. I've heard shrimpers in the Gulf call each other on certain nights, hill country fire dispatchers with accents I don't have a right to, airplanes talking to towers I couldn't point to on a map. The lake likes to bend sound until a thing lands in the wrong room. Still, the pencil line bothered me. I ran my finger over the indentation and it caught like a cut that healed wrong. 3 pages back I found it again, 19 years before the 19 years, a different hand, same complaint. Not water, underlined twice. There's another thing old guys say when you sit the chair after midnight and you've polished all the ritual to a dull quiet. They'll come up from the docks with their hands in their pockets, look out at the fog like it's telling secrets and say, "You'll hear Lost Channel 16 sooner or later." They say it too. Way fishermen talk about a shoal you can't see on the chart. They don't mean a frequency. 16 is a frequency. It has a number and a place. They mean a minute, I think. A seam in time where the distress keeps traveling and doesn't find an answer that makes it stop. My room has a clock I don't trust, and a clock in my head I trust too much. Around 2 a.m., the harbor goes from late to early, the ferry horns quiet, and the bait shop neon a pale rune in the fog. The gulls sleep or they make a pact to leave me alone. The red over green at the harbor mouth twitches in the soup like an eye opening and shutting. I pull the mic out of its cradle and hold it because that's what hands do when ears are working too hard. Harbor Watch 7 standing by, I say into a room no one else is in, just to hear my own voice come back from wood and radio plastic and whatever the lake thinks I am. It wasn't night the first time it happened to me. It was 02:45 pretending to be morning, a Tuesday pretending to be a Monday, and the fog lay down so fat on the water that the channel marker bell answered itself out of habit with no wind to push it. The old radio teased a carrier I could taste more than hear, a little push back against the static, and then the sound widened like someone had leaned into the mic at the far end of the world and breathed out Mayday with the part of their lungs they give to prayer. Mayday, Mayday, Mayday. The voice was a man's, maybe 30, maybe 60, the way radio flattens age and keeps only the sweat. This is the vessel. It clipped like someone had cut tape with scissors. Position. Then numbers. Crisp, as if read off a chart plotter that thought nothing was wrong. 41 degrees, 37.2 north, 86 degrees, 15.8 west. I wrote as I listened, the act of writing more real than the voice. The pencil felt heavy in my hand, and when I finished the second coordinate, I stopped writing because my brain arrived at the place those digits mean and put a picture on the wall of it for me. Coast. Orin, not water. Rows as neat as a parade if you looked from above. A grain elevator. County blacktop with a ditch sharp as a rule. Nature of distress? I keyed up, fatigued script finding its groove even while I craned at the plotter like it would blink and give me a different set of numbers if I stared hard enough. Say again your position. I repeated back what he'd said because that's how you make a thing sit still long enough to bring help to it. I added, "You're not on the lake," which is not in any manual. Silence. The carrier held, an obedient noise, and then the voice came again, everything in the same order, like a person hitting the same memory button over and over. Mayday, 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 this is a missing word where a name lives. Position, the same numbers. Taking on water, 4 souls aboard. A small noise after that like a hand finding a mouth and then away from it. Please advise. Station calling Mayday, switch to 22 Alpha, I said, because procedure is a rope you can hold when the floor behaves like waves. Sector will copy. I called sector on the second set, although I knew what they'd say before they said it. I plotted the coordinates and watched the cursor land in a dry grid 31 miles inland just off a county road I've driven to buy sweet corn when the season is right. Harbor Watch 7 sector, a pleasant Coast Guard voice said in my other ear. Go ahead. I read the distress as if the words made sense in a world where numbers had agreed that water was under boats and dirt was not. Stand by. They came back 30 seconds later with a professional calm that means, we are humoring you until the log is tidy. Negative water at that position. Acknowledge possible tropo. If possible, get vessel name, nature of distress. 4 souls aboard, I said, because the number was the one thing I knew how to count. The voice on 16 did not switch. It did not give me a name to hold. It kept climbing the same set of steps. The third time it came through, the sound under it changed, a low, long vowel like a room humming, and my throat tightened because it wasn't the lake. It was the particular hum of old fluorescent lights in a barn. Ridiculous thought. I say it anyway. I smelled silage when I swallowed. I can't tell you that without feeling stupid. I also can't not tell you because if I don't say it, I'll pretend it didn't happen, and that is not what we do in this chair. Do you have life jackets? I asked because it's what you ask kids and drunks and sometimes men who have forgotten the name of their boat. Is your bilge pump running? My pencil hovered over an empty line labeled vessel name, and I hated the empty. Drop anchor if able. I stopped myself from adding, there's nothing to catch, because sarcasm is not something you earn on a voice that doesn't know you. Copy, the man said, and then, because the world wanted to tilt for me, he said my name, not my call sign, my plain family name. Copy, name, he said in a soft, neutral way, like we were two people at a hardware store agreeing about rope. My mouth went numb. I hadn't said my name on the air. I don't say it. No one listening to the work channels uses it. Say again, I asked, too fast. What is your vessel name? The carrier hissed like a pan cooling. No answer to the question I knew how to score on a form. We see a light, the voice said instead, and there was a quality to the word light that reminded me of the breakwater in fog, there and not like a coin flipped between fingers. On the recorder later, because yes, we record, there is a sound between his words that I didn't hear a sound in the room. It is a rustle like a hand in dry leaves, except if you listen with the part of your head that knows machines. It is cornstalks against aluminum. I know how that sounds. I am a real person with a full sense of shame. I stand by it. Sector tried the triangulation trick with 3 ears, but the line of bearing from the 2 towers that could help swung like arms being pushed in different directions by a kid at a fair. Multipath, they said. Atmospherics. My pencil drew a trembling asterisk over a black square named something saints would be embarrassed to own. We are unable to bear, Sector said, and they didn't say it with sadness because radios are math most nights, and math doesn't apologize. Describe your vessel, I asked. Silence long enough for me to hear the low barn light hum again, and in it, something clanking the way a hard-soled shoe finds the rungs of a steel ladder. We're not. The voice stumbled at the point where language demands you choose a verb and a noun. Then, different tone, as if he had turned his head and spoken to someone beside him. He's answering. That's where my blood went cold, but not with fear. With a recognition I do not have a right to. The way you talk about the person on the other end of a radio when you trust they are the thing keeping the night from folding up. Do you copy? He asked, and I said automatically, I copy. There is no vessel with that name on our lists, Sector said in my left ear because I had forgotten to take my finger off the pessimist switch. What name? I said. You didn't give me one. The one you logged, Sector said carefully, like you talked to a man who miswrote a 9 as a 4. I looked down. My pencil had filled the line. I had written a name I did not remember hearing and will not repeat here. It is not common. It is not nothing in my life. On 16, the carrier continued like a breath a person is holding on another person's behalf. We are taking on water, the man said for the last time. He did not sound panicked. He did not sound resigned. He sounded like a person recording facts because saying them made them true enough to hand to someone else. We can see rose. We can smell sweet. He laughed once, a small sound, embarrassed at what his mouth had done. Please advise. Switch to 2-2 Alpha, I said a third time. We are with you. In the recording, that last bit is a whisper, not because I meant it that way, but because my chest was a dull, hollow drum, and it turned everything I said into a thing with less breath than it needed. The carrier stepped down. The hiss came back. Somewhere outside, under the breakwater, a perch splashed at the surface, and the sound came up through wood like a foot on stairs. Sector wrote it up as possible atmospheric anomaly and unintelligible distress traffic. They logged my time, the numbers I gave them, and a recommendation for no broadcast notice to mariners because misleading calls cause their own harm. I closed up the room at dawn like a man making a bed in a dark hotel. Dutiful, quick, eyes on a place 6 inches in front of my shoes so I didn't have to decide what I believed. Fog lifted and took the bell sound with it. The gulls returned like the spell never happened. I walked the breakwater until the rocks ran out, and then I stood where a person who loves water stands when distances don't help. The hiss in my head receded enough that I could feel what my stomach was doing to me. I drove inland after I slept because the numbers wouldn't stop living in my hands. That's a confession. I don't go out to the coordinates when people call. That's not my job. You call the sheriff or coasties. You don't climb in your truck like a civilian vigilante. I did. I followed county blacktops until they narrowed into the kind of road that looks like it was made for tractors and grudgingly repurposed for cars. ditches. The smell of wet dirt like bread dough left to rise too long. The coordinate landed me at a field pulled straight as a sheet on a bed. Corn stubble cut it to the horizon. A dragged patch in the ditch held water like a mirror, the surface buggy and earnest. No river near, no pond, no culvert big enough to pretend at a lake. A farmhouse far off, square as a knuckle. On the side of a gray barn, high up near the roofline, the shadow of paint left by a sign long gone read something like, "Safe." Then weather took the rest. It could have said safety. It could have said Safeway. I wanted it to say Safe Harbor so badly I tasted blood where I bit my tongue to stop myself from making it true. I stood there long enough that a county truck pulled over to ask if I was stuck. The guy inside had the kind face people in uniform make when they recognize lost. "You all right?" he asked. "Looking for a dog," I lied, because everything else would make him tilt his head in a way that meant kindness and paperwork. He told me about a retriever that jumped a fence last night and how they found him asleep under a combine, and we agreed animals don't understand property lines. He drove on. The ditch gurgled very quietly, a tiny voice in a place too big for it. Back at the marina, I pulled the oldest logbook and counted. 19 years ago minus a day, an operator named Dolores had written the same numbers I wrote, a different order of halves, 3 souls aboard instead of 4, and her note said, he knew my name. 19 before that, the hand was Hank's, a man I only ever knew as a voice at the 4th of July barbecue. The pencil pressed hard into the page. Vessel gave coordinates 30 miles inland. Voice said, "You always answer." 19. And before that, the ledger changes. The marina then was a bait shop with a radio, and the note is one line in fountain pen, rusted brown now. Mayday repeated. Numbers make no sense. Stan says not to humor ghosts. I put my hand over the page like I could warm it, and felt like the radio was my heart after all. I ran all the rational things you run when your life has to be explainable enough to share with someone who loves you. Inversions, multipath, a pair of idiots with a scanner and malice and a GPS, the weirdness of the number 19, metonic cycles, some ham at the end of a lake who likes the moon too much, the way your brain will knit any set of points into a shape if you let it. Then I came back to the taped audio at 2:45 and played the last 10 seconds over and over until I could do it without my shoulders going up around my ears. I wrote, in my own log, in the margin because the formal lines didn't want it. He said my name. It reads like a child wrote it. The next week, fog laid down again, heavier, and the bell inside the harbor answered itself out of habit. I sat the chair. I told myself I'd keep it clinical if it came. At 2:45 the carrier lifted, the same way a bird takes off from a flat calm, and the voice did what it had done, in the order it liked. I repeated, asked for a vessel name, asked if he could switch channels, got nothing but the sound of cornstalks gently trying to remind aluminum it did not belong here. I keyed up and said not into professionalism but into that part of a person that throws out the rope anyway. I'm here. It is not something you put on a form. It is not something training gives a slot for. It is, however, the only sentence that felt like it could lay a hand on a night and ask it to stand still with me. This is the part where I should have a theory to comfort myself with or a moral to brand the memory so the next 19 years don't dissolve what it did to me. I don't. I know there was a flood in this county in '48 that washed out roads and left a high water mark on a church that still wears the stain like a sash. I know people have drowned in ditches as easily as they have in lakes, and that water does not accept our categories. I know radios are honest about distance until they aren't. I know a man's voice said my name the way someone says a thing they've learned from hearing it only on the air. I can't stop sitting the chair. I've tried. A couple of times I passed the shift to someone else, and at 2:40 my ears started ringing in the particular frequency the old VHF uses to get my attention. At home, the bathroom fan will, at just the right stutter as it spins up, do the cadence of Mayday in its cheap bearings, and I have to turn it off and stand in the quiet for 3 breaths before I can make the water run. I carry coordinates inside me like loose screws in a pocket. Occasionally, when I drive past the cornfield where the numbers land, I slow, look for a light I know better than to expect, and without meaning to, make my mouth say the words the radio taught me, quietly enough that only I hear. Do you copy? Sometimes the ditch answers with a gurgle like a person thinking. Most times the only sound is wind crossing cut stalks, the oldest language I've ever learned to listen to, and the one I least understand. I ran a thrift store where the dead don't so much disappear as go half price. You learn to read a life at arm's length, enough to price it, not enough to cry. Our place sat in a strip of tired storefronts, vacant travel agency, nail salon with a neon open that buzzed even when it shouldn't, a payday loan with posters of laughing people no one recognized, The store smell was a little coin, a little lemon oil, a lot of dust softened by dryer sheet ghosts that cling to sweaters from houses that said yes to fresh starts. The ceiling tiles were that acoustic popcorn that remembers every leak. The lights were fluorescent tubes that trembled on cold mornings and leveled out to a single long vowel by noon. We hung a cowbell on the door because the electronic chime died and stayed dead. The bell made a real sound, which I liked. The back room was intake. Donation bay door that stuck when the weather turned, a hollow hallway choked with bankers' boxes, and the odd suitcase that had lived in someone's closet for a generation. We quarantined fabric and toys for a day on a rack no customer saw, not for disease, just for triage. It gave us a minute to decide what story we were about to tell on the sales floor. A big whiteboard listed the color tag on sale that week, blue, then red, then yellow, and below that our quota, 600 pounds processed per day. I pretended I didn't read that part every morning. My price gun wore like a bracelet, and the little pop, pop, pop of tags biting cardboard filled any silence that tried to make itself bigger than the room. Our regulars were a choir I could conduct in my sleep, resellers with sharp fingers, grandmas who folded every sweater before they would buy it, men who were always just looking for tools they never needed and always bought. Velma ran the register because she has a kindness that does not let people lie about what they can afford. Tony has. You led and teased me about antique feelings. We lifted furniture in pairs. We didn't leave mirrors facing each other because Velma said it was bad luck and bad for shoplifting. And we made little vignettes, 2 chairs and a table, a lamp that worked, a rug if we had one, to sell the idea of a life you could step into for less than a car payment. We get estate cleanouts. Someone dies, the house fills a storage unit. The storage unit becomes our back room because nobody can keep paying rent on grief. That's how the notes came in. A batch of bankers' boxes from a tidy brick ranch, each box labeled in a shaky hand on blue painter's tape. Kitchen, front room, please don't sell. Don't let mirrors face each other. It follows the silverware. I stood with my box cutter, blade clicked out, and felt something under my breastbone that wasn't pity or profit. The tape stuck to my fingers when I peeled it. I set the notes aside because I have a quota and a boss who lives by spreadsheets, and because superstition slows you down even when it's dressed like courtesy. The boxes held decent stuff. A silver plate set in a velvet-lined walnut case that smelled like old polish and holidays. 2 narrow mirrors with beveled edges, finials like little acorns. A pair of tufted wingbacks upholstered in a brown-green that tried to be neutral and failed in a charming way. An end table with a water ring the size of a coffee mug, top worn to a soft gloss where a hand rested for years. The rug was thin, braided, with a corner that refused to lie down unless you asked it. A lamp with a linen shade stamped with a faint rectangle where a price sticker had lived in another life. Ordinary and not. Nothing that should worry a person except the way the notes stuck to my wrist and refused to let go. I priced. The silver got a modest tag because people are allergic to polishing what they own now. The Emmys. Horrors got hung on a rolling rack of frames. The chairs went to the front window where light makes old upholstery look forgiving. I put the rug down by the door with the cowbell because rugs by doors sell. I am not a man who puts weight on coincidences, but the minute the rug settled, the front door opened and a careful woman in a wool coat stepped over it like it was someone's name. We reset at closing, broom then mop around the islands of furniture like we were working a quiet river. Purses back on their pegs, books squared and spined for people to judge. I straightened chairs the way I put teeth back in a mouth. The night the boxes arrived, I did the walk and found 2 chairs drawn closer than we had left them, like a shy conversation had made them forget their angles. I chalked a little mark on the floor by the front legs, a private tell to catch Velma and Tony when they thought I wasn't watching. Quit making it pretty on your way out, I'd say, friendly. I turned off the radio that plays oldies until they sound new again, and pulled down the gate. In the dark, the store looked like an unfinished thought. I did not sleep that well. That's not haunting, that's retail. You keep a ledger in your head of what will sell and what won't, and whether you priced kindness fair. But when I unlocked the next morning, the chalk lines had moved. We run a half-off morning once a week. People line up, soft shoes on concrete, coffee steam and patience. I watched a woman in a wool coat, same one from yesterday. I couldn't swear to it. Coats make us uniform. Run her hand along the silver case like it might hum back. She bought it. The pair of mirrors, the braided rug, and the lamp that wore its sticker's old shadow. For $40 in change after the blue tag discount, she carried away a room. She paid in cash, exact, like someone counting prayers. Tony carried the chairs to her hatchback because those were heavy, and she made that face people make when they want help and don't want to ask. At 10 the next Morning. She was back. The cowbell jumped twice because she hit the door harder than most people do when they are trying to make a decisive noise out of a question. Her hands shook in a neat way, like a person who practices a tremor to keep it from becoming chaos. She set the silver case on the counter and the rug folded over her arm like a pet. The mirrors were wrapped in newspaper that didn't belong to this week. She said, "I need to return these," and didn't say why. I have seen people return items because of bedbugs that weren't there, because of money that needed to be elsewhere, because of grief that arrived late. She laid her receipt flat and said exact change on top. $40.31, coins clinking like punctuation. "That's not how returns work," Velma started to say, and I waved her off because it was that or argue with a woman whose mouth wanted to explain and failed. "It won't stay," she said finally, the words small and a big quiet. "My table won't hold the silver. The end table rolled itself against the wall until the lamp sat where it used to, but the wall's not there. The silver keeps moving to the corner that doesn't exist. The mirrors." She swallowed and laughed like a manicurist who nicked you. "Don't let two mirrors face each other. I know, but I turned them, and they turned back while I was on the phone." She looked at me like my face might be a map to a place she could go where none of that was ridiculous. "I think it was like this in someone else's house," she said. "I think the room knows. It won't be my house no matter what I do." I had thrown away the note that said, "It follows the silverware." It slid into my brain anyway, clean as if I had written it. I did the refund because price is not the only kind of fair. She left, unburdened of objects but carrying exactly the same weight she walked in with, and I had my hands on a pile we needed to reshelve. The mirrored pair went back on the frame rack. The rug unrolled itself at the door, as good as any other rug and better than the ratty ones. The silver went to a locked case because sometimes we act like a pawn shop to make rent. After lunch, when the line thinned and the radio did that thing where it plays the same 3 songs as if you wouldn't notice, the floor began to pull itself together. I say it like a magic trick. It didn't move in a way you could record with a camera and offer as evidence. It moved like memory moves, quiet, incremental, certain. The chairs, not the same pair she bought because those were gone, drew themselves into a conversation. We had another wingback and a low armchair nobody likes because it carries a smell like somebody smoked through a winter in it. They angled toward each other as if listening. The end table with the water ring slid a half-inch into the space they made. The lamp turned to face a corner like there was a window there. The braided rug rotated a dog's half-turn and settled with its stubborn corner facing the register, which is not how I had left it. "Velma," I said, my voice aiming for light and landing wrong. "You staging?" "Don't put that on me," she said from the register without looking up. "I don't move your little pictures unless I need to mop. You know my back won't let me." Tony whistled low. "You got a ghost decorator," he said, and then kinder. "You want me to break it up?" He lifted the lamp. We spun the rug. I turned the chairs out toward the aisle like they were on display, which they were. I taped a square of blue painter's tape under one chair foot because I wanted to be a rational man when I walked away and came back. We did our work. People came and judged the arrangement with their eyes like we meant it, and we sold a pair of plates for 50 cents because someone needed them. After we closed that night, I counted drawers and closed jewelry cases and locked the back door, and when I came out to the floor, the room had reassembled itself again. The way a bed you just made can mold to a body that hasn't slept in it for years. The tape under the chair foot pulled a little to the left, stretched like gum. The lamp was on. I don't leave lamps on because codes and common sense. The cord draped a curve across the floor that made an invisible wall between the rug and the door. I walked around because I couldn't step through it without feeling like I would be intruding. I turned the lamp off and the switch felt warm, the way a hand does. I could smell onions, faint, the kind cooked low and long in a kitchen that wants to comfort and believes in it. People bring smell with them. I've known that since a box of silk scarves came in that were the exact perfume a woman wore who made me dumb at 17. This wasn't in a scarf. It lived in the air above the rug, the way sun lives in a spot on the floor a cat remembers. I stood in it and the radio, which had been dead 10 minutes by my hand, hummed the tail end of a song and stopped. I checked the camera in the office because cameras tell the truth we like best, the one that doesn't depend on anyone's mouth. The playback showed us closing, the long fast-forward of an empty room, the motion detection rectangles flickering on and off as the sensor argued with breath. At 2:45, a static snow that shouldn't exist on digital slashed the frame like rain in a movie. The room jumped. The chairs were closer. The lamp had turned. When the picture steadied, a man-shaped smear was in the mirror for half a second, a tall oval without edges, and then it wasn't. I sat down in the office chair on my keys, said my own name like I was checking attendance, and immediately felt ridiculous because none of this had been about me until I made it so. The problem isn't the objects, I wrote on a sticky note that night with my hand shaking like Velma's customer. It's the way they rearranged a pretty to look like a place someone else remembered. It sounded like a fine line in a cheap book. It also sounded like the only thing I knew. We kept selling because we have to keep selling. A store is a stomach. You feed it, and it digests. The silver went again to a reseller with a good nose and a clean tote. The mirrors found a teenager who wanted a pair to lean against a dorm wall. The rug went to a man who saw cottage in everything. The lamp sat a few days, and then a woman with painter's hands bought it for her studio. Each buyer came back or called within a week with some variation of the same complaint that wasn't a complaint. It keeps going where it was, one said. I put the rug down, and it turned like a dog, but none of my furniture moved. They brought change, exact, even the odd cents the register spits out that people usually wave off. The mirror turned to face the hall, the teenager said on the phone. There's no hall like that. The reseller dropped the silver case on my counter and said nothing for a long time. He put 3 dimes, a nickel, and a penny lined up exactly as they were on his receipt. He said, "You didn't tell me it would bring its place." I put a house sign up in my brain. Do not stage vignettes with returned sets, because it felt like we were giving the room a head start every morning. I counseled Velma to turn mirrors away from each other. I told you, she said, and then kissed her teeth because she liked being right and didn't like this a bit. Tony chalked little parentheses on the floor under chair legs like a prank we were in on. The security feed did that thing again at 2:45, a skip in the gray where the clock frame hopped, and when it landed, the arrangement returned in precisely the same proportions as the day before, even if the pieces were different. It's unsettling, more than a ghost, to discover that ratios have a memory and don't care what fills them. I tried to talk myself out of magic by inventing a villain. A human prank is easier on the heart than a room that wants to be itself. I thought about a custode, Mayor, who resented us. I thought about Tony with an elaborate sense of humor. I thought about Velma making a point. I thought about sleepwalking. I left the chairs sealed off with masking tape and a slip of paper under a leg with my inked initials. In the morning, the tape was stretched, the paper folded in 2, my initials on the outside like someone had read them and made them into something private. I made a floor plan on graph paper like a real manager would. I logged where the room wanted to be every day for 9 days. The dimensions wobbled an inch here, a half foot there, but the anchor points stayed. A corner where no corner existed, a window where the front door is, a strip of sun where fluorescents don't make sun. Once, at that imaginary window, dust lifted like the way you see dust lift at a real window when somebody walks past the house. The onion smell came and went, sometimes onion, sometimes coffee that had lived on a burner beyond sense. I heard a radio in the back whisper the end of a song on nights I had proofed the breakers twice. At home, my own room began to fail at staying mine. This is the part of the confession that makes people lean back. I have 3 pieces from the store that I told myself were practical. A low bookshelf, a lamp with a shade not worth remarking on, a set of bone-handled butter knives because I like the weight. One night I came in and the lamp had turned to face the corner where no corner matters, the exact angle of our store's lamp. The butter knives had migrated from the drawer where I put them into the wooden tray I didn't remember owning, handle patina lined up in a way that did not belong to me. My couch, which is not a couch people admire, shifted 2 inches in a slow, stubborn way so that if I stood in the kitchen and looked into the living area, I could tell that it believed a window lived where my blank wall continued. It did not scare me. I had the decency to be unsettled, but what I felt was closer to being corrected by someone who loves you enough to be patient about it.